Hi everyone, today we'll be going over accounts October-November 2021, paper 2-2, question number 2. This is structured paper 2, which consists question of 90 marks, and it also has a time limit of 90 minutes. And since question number 2 is of 15 marks, we will be attempting to solve this question under 15 minutes. So without any further delay, let's get started. Shamal maintains a full set of accounting records, and he has extracted a trial balance at 30 September 2021 that does not balance, and he has opened a suspense account for the difference. And then Shamal has identified the following 6 errors, and there were no other errors. So firstly, let's have a look at the question. We need to prepare the suspense account at 30 September 2021, clearly identifying the opening balance. So we do not know whether the opening balance will fall on the debit side or the credit side. So we need to figure that out by balancing all of these errors first. So let's have a look at the first error. A payment of 169 for motor repairs had been correctly entered in the cash book, but had been debited to the motor repairs account as 196. So the amount should have been 169, but we posted it as 196. So let's just figure out the difference first. So that's 196 minus 169, which gives the difference to be 27. So the motor repairs account is overstated by 27, we could say that. And in case of overstatement, we need to reduce it. So if the motor repairs account was debited before, we need to credit it with 27. And while crediting it, the suspense account will contain the motor repairs on the debit side. So let's just write it down. I'm just going to leave a space above because we do not know whether the opening balance will fall on the debit or credit side. So that's motor repairs, and it will have the value of 27. Alright, let's have a look at the second error. The purchase of a new machinery, 670, had been debited to a general expenses. So this is actually an error of principle. An error of principle does not affect the suspense account, so we can just completely skip this one. Let's move to the third error. Discount allowed of 175 had been entered correctly in the cash book, but had not been posted to the discount allowed account. So we've already entered it in the cash book, but we should have mentioned 175 in the discount allowed, but we forgot to do so. So in that case, we can just identify this 175 to be an understatement in the discount allowed section. So if we're talking about discount allowed, that is an expense, and expenses are always debited. So in case of a suspense account, this discount allowed will be posted to the credit side. Again, I will be leaving a space above, and let's write it down, discount allowed. And it had the value of 175. Now we can move to the fourth error. The sales journal was totaled at 86,961. The total should have been 86,741. So it is obviously greater than what it should have been, so we can just say that the sales was overstated. Let's figure out the overstated amount first. So that's just the difference between these two amounts, 86,961 minus 86,741. which gives the overstatement of sales to be of 220. So if we're talking about sales, it is actually an income, and incomes are always credited. And we're talking about overstatement, so obviously we need to reduce it. In order to do so, we actually need to debit this amount of 220. And if we're talking about suspense account, we now need to post it to the credit side. So I will just write the heading to be sales. This is actually an overstatement, and it was overstated by 220. Alright, we can look at another error now. A check for 425 received from McCann, a credit customer, had been correctly entered in the cash book, but had been debited to the sales ledger control account. So this is actually a receipt from a credit customer, which should have been entered on the credit side, but we actually entered this amount of 425 in the debit side. So what we required was 425 on the credit side. So if you are to post 425 on the credit side once, then the debit and credit side just cancels each other, and there will be no balance indicating that we received a check for 425 from McCann, right? So in order to show that amount on the credit side, we actually need to record this amount of 425 twice, so that once it gets cancelled out with the debit side's amount, and once it shows that the check had been received. So the total amount to be posted to the credit side is 425 plus 425, which is 850. So since we will be recording this in the sales ledger control account on the credit side, under the suspense account, we will actually be posting this on the debit side with the amount of 850 under the heading of sales ledger control account. Let's do that. Okay, this needs the amount of 850. Now we can look at the last error. The total of the discount received column in the cash book, 490, had been entered twice on the correct side of the discount received account. So if we're talking about discount received, it is actually an income, which means that these are credited. So this amount of 490 had been credited twice. In order to rectify this error, we need to record 490 on the debit side once, right? And under the suspense account, this will be posted to the credit side under the heading of discount received. Let's write it down. So this is an overstatement with the amount of 490. Now, in order to figure out whether the opening balance will be on the debit side or the credit side, we need to find the total for both the debit sides and the credit side and see which is the heavier side. Okay, let's do the process for the debit side. So that's going to be 27 plus 850, which gives the total of 877. Then repeat the same process for credit side. That's going to be 175 plus 220 plus 490, which gives the total for 885. So obviously we can see that the heavier side is the credit side. So this will be the total for both the sides. Let's just write that down. So obviously we need a balancing figure on the debit side, and that balancing figure will be the opening balance. So we can write it down as the trial balance error, because that will be the opening balance for the suspense account. Error or difference. Now, in order to figure out the balancing figure, we just subtract all of these amounts from the total amount. So that's going to be 885 minus 27 minus 850, which gives the trial balance difference to be 8. Alright, this concludes the suspense account as well as the first part. Now we can move to the second one. Now we need to complete the table to name the type of error in each of the errors 1, 2, and 3 identified by Shamil. Let's have a look at the errors. So for error number 1, a payment of 169 for motor repairs had been correctly entered in the cash book, but had been debited to the motor repairs account as 196. So the error here is that while posting the amount, we actually switched the numbers, right? And these kinds of error are termed as error of transposition. So let's write it down. So the error is error of transposition. Let's look at the second error. The purchase of new machinery 670 had been debited to general expenses. So like I said before, this is an error of principle. That's why we did not include this in the suspense account. Let's write it down. That's error of principle. Let's have a look at the third error. We're given that the discount allowed of 175 had been correctly entered in the cash book but had not been posted to the discount allowed account. So obviously it had been posted in the cash book, but we omitted it in the discount allowed account, so we can identify this error as a partial omission, because obviously we entered it in the cash book, we just forgot to enter it in the discount allowed account. Let's do that. So that's error of partial omission. Alright, this concludes the second part. We can now move to the third one. Explain 2 benefits to a business of preparing a purchases ledger control account. So if we're talking about purchases, obviously it helps identifying the trade payables, which ultimately helps in the preparation of financial statements. Let's write that down. Identifies total trade payables, which helps in the preparation of financial statements. Then secondly, we segregate the duties. So we do not assign the same person to prepare the purchases ledger account and the purchases ledger control account. So we assign these two tasks to two different peoples, which helps in the detection of fraud. So that's another advantage. Let's write it down. As a result of segregation of duties, possibility of fraud is reduced. All right, this concludes the third part. Let's move to the fourth one. We need to state two items that will appear on the credit side of a purchases ledger control account. So obviously the first item is the opening balance of the purchase ledger control account, because that will always appear on the credit side. So we can write it down as opening balance, or we can also term it as brought forward balance. Then secondly, we record the credit purchases on the credit side because it obviously increases the value of the total trade payables. Let's write it down as well. Credit purchases. Alright, this concludes the fourth part as well as this question. If you found this video useful, make sure you leave a like and leave a comment below. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so that you do not miss any of these videos in the future. Thank you.